The first rays of dawn barely pierced through the dense fog that had settled over the affluent Oak Ridge neighborhood in Connecticut. Most mansions along Evergreen Avenue remained silent, their occupants still buried beneath expensive sheets and dreams of bigger portfolios. But in the staff quarters of the Harrington estate, Eloise Parker was already awake. At 52, Eloise moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of invisibility. Her uniform, pressed navy dress with white trim, hung on her door, the same outfit she'd worn for the 15 years she'd served as head maid for the Harringtons. She smoothed the simple gold cross around her neck, a gift from her late mother, before tucking it beneath her collar. The kitchen was her domain this early. Eloise worked methodically, preparing breakfast for the family while simultaneously packaging a separate meal with particular care. Into a sturdy container went scrambled eggs, still steaming, alongside bacon, toast with strawberry jam, and sliced fruit. She wrapped it carefully, adding a thermos of hot coffee with cream and 2 sugars. Again with that? The voice came from behind her, sharp with judgment. Eloise didn't need to turn around to know it was Vanessa, the 20-something assistant housekeeper hired last spring. The girl had expensive highlights and perpetually raised eyebrows. "Good morning to you too, Vanessa," Eloise replied, her tone pleasant but firm. "Mrs. Harrington would fire you if she knew you were giving away food like that." Vanessa leaned against the counter, scrolling through her phone. "Especially to that crazy old woman. Mrs. Harrington pays me to manage this household, and I haven't heard any complaints about missing groceries." Eloise secured the lid on the container. "Besides, what happens before official working hours is my business. Your business is going to get you fired." Vanessa snorted. "You think that old bag lady appreciates your charity? She probably sells it." Eloise paused, studying the younger woman. "There's more to people than what you see on the surface, Vanessa. You might learn something if you talk to her instead of judging." "Yeah, I'll pass on life lessons from someone who lives in the bushes." Vanessa pushed away from the counter. "Anyway, Mrs. Harrington wants her breakfast on the terrace. She has that charity planning meeting at 9. Eloise nodded. The irony wasn't lost on her. Margaret Harrington chaired 3 different philanthropic organizations, but couldn't spare a kind word for the homeless woman at her own gate. After ensuring the family's breakfast was perfectly arranged, Eloise slipped out the service entrance with her special package. The morning air felt crisp against her skin as she walked the curved driveway toward the wrought iron gates. The Harrington estate sprawled over 3 acres of manicured grounds, with the main house perched imperiously at the center. 12,000 square feet of colonial architecture and old money. Near the gates, partially hidden by a row of hydrangea bushes, sat a small figure wrapped in layers of mismatched clothing despite the mild September weather. Even from a distance, Eloise could see the woman's hands, gnarled with arthritis, clutching a worn paperback book. "Good morning, Eleanor," Eloise called softly. The older woman looked up, her weathered face breaking into a smile that transformed her entire countenance. Despite her circumstances, Eleanor's eyes remained sharp and intelligent beneath the creases that mapped her face. "You're punctual as always, Eloise." Her voice carried the refined cadence of education, something Eloise had noticed from their first interaction 3 months ago. Eloise sat down on the stone bench beside her, handing over the container. "Breakfast is served." Eleanor accepted it with a nod of thanks. "You're too kind, truly." "It's nothing." Eloise smoothed her apron. "Did you sleep okay last night? It got chilly." "I've endured worse." Eleanor opened the container, inhaling the aroma with appreciation. "This smells divine." They sat in comfortable silence as Eleanor ate with the careful, measured movements of someone who had known hunger. Eloise had tried numerous times to convince her to accept more help, to contact social services or at least spend nights at the shelter downtown, but Eleanor refused with unwavering politeness. "The book seems interesting," Eloise commented, nodding toward the paperback. "Hemingway, The Old Man and the Sea." Eleanor's lips quirked. "Seemed fitting, though I'm neither old man nor at sea." "Just fighting your own battles," Eloise observed. Eleanor's gaze sharpened. "We all are, in our own ways." A sleek BMW slowed as it passed the gates. The driver, a neighbor from 3 doors down, staring with undisguised contempt before accelerating away. "Your neighbors don't appreciate your humanitarian efforts." Eleanor took a sip of coffee. Eloise shrugged. "They don't appreciate anything that isn't in their tax bracket. And yet you work for them. I work for myself and my grandson's college fund. The Harringtons just pay the bills." Eloise checked her watch. "Speaking of which, I should head back." Mrs. Harrington will be expecting her fresh squeezed orange juice by now. Eleanor carefully resealed the thermos. Thank you, Eloise. Not just for the food. Will you tell me your last name today? Eloise asked, their daily ritual. And as always, Eleanor smiled mysteriously. Perhaps tomorrow. Eloise gathered the empty containers from yesterday's meal and stood. I'll see you this evening then. I'll be right here. Eleanor's eyes drifted toward the road, a fleeting sadness crossing her features. Where else would I go? As Eloise walked back toward the mansion, she didn't notice the black sedan with tinted windows that slowed near the gate, nor the camera lens that briefly focused on Eleanor before the car continued down the street. Back inside, the house had come alive with activity. 17-year-old Amber Harrington was arguing with her mother about using the family's boat this weekend, while Mr. Harrington barked orders into his phone about stock options. Neither acknowledged Eloise as she slipped past them to clear breakfast dishes. Did you hear about the homeless woman? Mrs. Harrington's voice carried from the terrace. Susan Jenkins from the Neighborhood Association says we should call the police. It's bringing down property values. I told you weeks ago to have security remove her, Mr. Harrington replied dismissively. Just handle it, Margaret. Eloise kept her expression neutral as she worked, though her hands tightened around the sterling silver serving tray. The Harringtons had more bathrooms than they used, and a guest house that had remained empty for years. Yet the sight of one elderly woman near their gates was somehow unbearable. That evening, as dusk settled over the neighborhood, Eloise prepared another meal, this time a hearty beef stew with fresh bread. As she was packaging it, her phone buzzed with a text from her daughter. Mom, can you take Marcus this weekend? Jason's mom is in the hospital and I got called for an extra shift. Eloise smiled at the thought of her 8-year-old grandson. Of course, baby, I'll pick him up Friday after work. She added an extra cookie to Eleanor's package, thinking the woman might enjoy giving it to Marcus when he inevitably accompanied her on her food deliveries this weekend. The boy had taken an immediate liking to Eleanor last month, fascinated by her stories about constellations and ancient mythology. When Eloise reached the gate, however, Eleanor wasn't in her usual spot. A momentary panic gripped her as she scanned the area, relief washing over her when she spotted the familiar figure huddled against the stone wall, partially hidden by shadows. Eleanor? Eloise approached cautiously. Are you all right? The woman looked up, and Eloise gasped softly. Eleanor's right eye was swollen, a dark bruise forming along her cheekbone. What happened? Eloise set down the food and knelt beside her. Just a misunderstanding, Eleanor said, attempting a smile that became a wince. Some local teenagers thought it would be amusing to teach the old beggar a lesson about staying in her place. Fury rose in Eloise's chest. We need to report this, I'm calling the police. No. Eleanor's hand shot out with surprising strength, gripping Eloise's wrist. No police. Please. Eleanor, you've been assaulted. Those boys are the sons of your employer's friends. Eleanor's voice remained steady. Nothing will come of it except more trouble. Eloise sat back on her heels, conflicted. At least let me clean that cut. I have a first aid kit in my quarters. Eleanor hesitated, then nodded slightly. If you insist. They made their way slowly back to the service entrance, Eleanor leaning heavily on Eloise's arm. Just as they reached the door, headlights swept across the driveway as Mrs. Harrington's Range Rover pulled in. Eloise quickly guided Eleanor around the corner of the building, out of sight. I can't go inside, Eleanor whispered urgently. If they see me. It's okay, Eloise assured her. My quarters have a separate entrance. Nobody will know. Once safely inside Eloise's modest apartment within the staff wing, Eleanor seemed to relax slightly, though her eyes darted around the unfamiliar space. Eloise directed her to sit at the small kitchen table while she gathered first aid supplies. This might sting, Eloise warned as she gently cleaned the cut with antiseptic. Eleanor didn't flinch, watching Eloise with an unreadable expression. Why do you help me, Eloise? The question hung between them, simple, yet weighted with significance. Because it's the right thing to do, Eloise answered finally. And because 30 years ago I was one missed paycheck away from being in your position. I doubt that. It's true. After my husband died, I had a 3-year-old, no job, no degree. Eloise applied ointment to the cut with gentle strokes. A woman at my church helped me get my first housekeeping job. Without her, who knows? Eleanor nodded slowly. One act of kindness can change everything. Sometimes it's all we have to offer. Eloise finished bandaging the cut. There. Not perfect, but better. Thank you. Eleanor's voice had softened. For a moment, she seemed on the verge of saying something more, but instead she reached for the container of now lukewarm stew. As they ate together at Eloise's small table, a distant rumble of thunder signaled an approaching storm. Rain began to patter against the windows, gradually increasing to a downpour. "You can't go back out in this," Eloise said firmly. "Stay here tonight." Eleanor shook her head. "I've already imposed enough. It's not an imposition. I have an extra bed." Seeing Eleanor's reluctance, Eloise added, "Please, for my peace of mind if nothing else." After a long moment, Eleanor nodded. "Just for tonight." Later, as Eleanor slept in the spare room normally reserved for Marcus's visits, Eloise sat at her kitchen table, scrolling through news articles on her tablet. Something had been nagging at her. Eleanor's refined speech, her knowledge of literature, the way she sometimes forgot to maintain her facade of destitution. On impulse, Eloise typed, "Missing Wealthy Women, Connecticut," into the search bar. Nothing relevant appeared, but as she was about to give up, her phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. "Heads up, big meeting tomorrow. All staff required. Mrs. H says something about major changes coming. Probably more budget cuts." Eloise frowned, setting down her phone. The Harringtons weren't known for their generosity to staff, but major changes sounded ominous. She glanced toward the spare room where Eleanor slept, wondering not for the first time what circumstances had led such an educated, dignified woman to the streets, and why she chose to remain at this particular gate day after day. The storm intensified outside, wind lashing rain against the windows as lightning illuminated the grounds in brief electric flashes. In one such flash, Eloise caught sight of something unusual, a figure standing near the main gates, seemingly impervious to the downpour, staring toward the mansion. She blinked, and when the next lightning came, the figure was gone. Eloise shivered, though her apartment was warm. Something was shifting, like the air pressure before a tornado. For reasons she couldn't articulate, she felt certain that tomorrow would bring more than just staffing changes to the Harrington estate. What she couldn't possibly know was how drastically her own life was about to change, or that the frail woman sleeping in her spare room held the key to secrets that would shake the foundations of everything around them. Morning arrived with unsettling stillness following the night's storm. Eloise woke earlier than usual, her mind preoccupied with both the mysterious meeting and her unexpected houseguest. To her surprise, Eleanor was already awake and dressed in her layered clothing, sitting primly at the kitchen table. "I should leave before the house wakes," Eleanor said, her bruised face looking slightly better in the gentle morning light. "At least have some breakfast first." Eloise busied herself with coffee and toast, studying Eleanor surreptitiously. Sleep had transformed the woman somehow, her posture straighter, her movements more refined. "The meeting isn't until 10. No one will see you leave through the service entrance." Eleanor nodded her acquiescence. "I've imposed on your kindness long enough." "It's not an imposition," Eloise reiterated, setting 2 mugs of coffee on the table. "In fact, I was thinking, my grandson is visiting this weekend. I have a pull-out couch. You could stay." A complex emotion flashed across Eleanor's face. "I can't." "Why not?" Eloise pressed gently. "Whatever you're running from or waiting for, you can do it with a roof over your head." Eleanor's fingers tightened around her mug. "Some choices we make bind us to certain paths, Eloise, even when those paths seem inexplicable to others." Before Eloise could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from the head of household staff. "Meeting moved up. 8:30 a.m. Mandatory. Main hall." Eloise frowned. "I need to get ready. Something's happening." "Go," Eleanor urged. "I can see myself out." Reluctantly, Eloise prepared for work, changing into her uniform and pinning her hair back. When she emerged from her bedroom, Eleanor was standing by the window, staring toward the main gate with an intensity that gave Eloise pause. "Are you expecting someone?" Eloise asked. Eleanor turned, her expression unreadable. "It's been exactly 100 days. Yes, I'm expecting someone." The cryptic answer hung between them as Eloise checked her watch. "I have to go. Please lock the door when you leave. And Eleanor," she hesitated, "be careful." Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. "You too, Eloise, more than you know." More than... The staff meeting was already underway when Eloise slipped into the main hall. All 23 household employees were present, an unprecedented gathering that included everyone from the groundskeepers to Mrs. Harrington's personal stylist. The atmosphere crackled with tension. Margaret Harrington stood at the center, impeccably dressed in a tailored cream suit that probably cost more than Eloise's annual salary. Beside her was Mr. Harrington, looking unusually somber. "As I was saying, Mrs. Harrington continued, barely acknowledging Eloise's arrival. Effective immediately, the estate will be undergoing significant changes in preparation for an extended visit from an important business associate of Mr. Harrington's. Murmurs rippled through the staff. The Harringtons rarely entertained overnight guests, let alone extended ones. This associate is extremely private and values discretion above all else. For the next 2 weeks, security protocols will be enhanced. Mrs. Harrington gestured to a stern-faced man in a dark suit, whom Eloise had never seen before. Mr. Reeves will be coordinating additional security personnel. You will comply with all directives without question. The stranger stepped forward. Starting today, all staff will undergo enhanced background checks. The property perimeter will be monitored 24/7. No unauthorized individuals are permitted on or near the grounds. Eloise's stomach tightened. She thought of Eleanor by the gate. Furthermore, Mrs. Harrington added, the grounds must be immaculate. That includes removing any unsightly elements from around the property. Her gaze fixed meaningfully on Eloise. I understand there's been a vagrant loitering near our gates. That ends today. Eloise clenched her jaw but remained expressionless. 15 years of service had perfected her ability to mask her thoughts. The guest in question will arrive tomorrow. Mr. Harrington spoke for the first time, his voice unusually strained. His name is Alexander Morris, CEO of Centauri Technologies. Some of you may have heard of him. A collective intake of breath swept through the room. Everyone knew Centauri Technologies. The company had revolutionized quantum computing and was worth billions. Its reclusive founder was rarely seen in public, which made his visit all the more unusual. Mr. Morris has specific requirements, Mrs. Harrington continued. The East Wing guest suite must be completely renovated by tonight. His security team will arrive this afternoon to sweep the property. The meeting continued with a litany of demands and preparations, but Eloise was only half listening, her mind racing. When they were finally dismissed, she headed straight for the kitchen, needing a moment to process everything, particularly what this meant for Eleanor. Vanessa intercepted her in the hallway, eyes wide with excitement. Can you believe it, Alexander Morris? Do you know he's only 42 and worth like 20 billion? Fascinating, Eloise replied flatly. They say he hasn't given an interview in 5 years. Not since his wife. Vanessa stopped abruptly, glancing around before lowering her voice. Not since his wife disappeared. Some people think he had something to do with it. This caught Eloise's attention. His wife disappeared? Yeah, like vanished. No body, no trace. She was this brilliant mathematician or something. The press was obsessed with it for months. Vanessa was clearly relishing the gossip. They had a son too, poor kid. Before Eloise could inquire further, Mr. Reeves appeared at the end of the hallway. Parker? A word. Vanessa shot her a sympathetic look before scurrying away. Eloise approached the security chief with measured steps, her spine straight. Mrs. Harrington informed me you've been interacting with the homeless woman at the gate, he stated without preamble. Eloise met his gaze steadily. I've given her food occasionally, yes. That stops immediately. She needs to be gone before the security team arrives at noon. She's an elderly woman who poses no threat to anyone, Eloise countered, keeping her voice respectful, but firm. That's not your concern. His tone left no room for argument. Handle it, or we will. As he walked away, Eloise fought down her rising anger. She needed to warn Eleanor, but her morning duties demanded attention first. Mrs. Harrington was particularly demanding today, changing her outfit 3 times before her charity luncheon and requiring Eloise to reorganize her entire jewelry collection for the upcoming dinner. It was nearly 11 when Eloise finally managed to slip away. She hurried toward the gate, a bag containing a sandwich and bottle of water clutched in her hand as a pretense. But as she rounded the curved driveway, her steps faltered. Eleanor wasn't alone. 2 security guards in dark suits stood over her, one speaking into a radio while the other gestured impatiently for her to gather her meager belongings. Eleanor sat perfectly still, her head bowed, shoulders hunched in a posture of defeat that made Eloise's chest ache. Excuse me, Eloise called out, quickening her pace. What's happening here? The guards turned, sizing her up with dismissive glances. Staff? One asked curtly. Yes, head housekeeper, Eloise replied, injecting her voice with authority. What's going on? New security protocols. No loiterers on property. We're removing her. Eloise stepped closer to Eleanor, noting how the woman refused to look up. She's not on the property. This is public access space. Not anymore. The Harringtons have extended their security perimeter to include the gate approach. She needs to be gone in 5 minutes. Eloise knelt beside Eleanor, speaking softly. Come with me. I can help you find somewhere else. Finally, Eleanor raised her head. The resignation in her eyes pierced Eloise deeply. It's all right. I knew this would happen eventually. Ma'am, time's up, the guard interrupted. Move along, or we'll call the police. Eleanor slowly gathered her worn backpack and the paperback book, rising with dignity despite her circumstances. She looked directly at Eloise, and for an instant something like relief flickered across her face. 100 days, she whispered. It's enough. Before Eloise could respond, the distant sound of engines broke the tense silence. Multiple engines, growing louder by the second. Everyone turned toward the road as a procession of vehicles appeared. Sleek black Teslas with tinted windows moving in perfect synchronization. 10 identical vehicles approached the gates, their formation almost militaristic in its precision. What the hell? One guard muttered, touching his earpiece. We weren't expecting Morris until tomorrow. The lead Tesla stopped directly in front of the gate, its engine purring quietly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the rear door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall and imposing, dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that spoke of wealth without ostentation. His dark hair was threaded with silver at the temples, and his clean-shaven face bore the sharp angles of someone who rarely smiled. Everything about him radiated authority and controlled power. Alexander Morris, one of the most influential men in tech, surveyed the scene with piercing gray eyes that missed nothing. His gaze swept past the guards, past Eloise, landing squarely on Eleanor. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. Then Eleanor slowly straightened, shedding her hunched posture like a discarded coat. Despite her shabby clothes and bruised face, she suddenly seemed taller, more substantial, as though a veil had been lifted. Alexander Morris took one step forward, then another. The guards moved to intercept him, but he brushed past them as though they were insignificant. Sir, one began, this area isn't secure yet. Morris ignored him completely, his focus unwavering as he approached Eleanor. When he reached her, he stopped, his expression cracking to reveal raw emotion, grief, disbelief, and something like awe. Mother, he said, his voice barely audible. What happened to you? Who did this? The world seemed to tilt beneath Eloise's feet. Mother? She stared at Eleanor. No, not Eleanor. In stunned silence, as pieces began falling into place. The woman reached up with trembling fingers to touch her son's face. Alexander. Right on time. In one fluid motion, Alexander Morris knelt before his mother, unmindful of his expensive suit against the damp ground. He gently touched the bruise on her cheek, his composure slipping to reveal naked fury. Who did this? He repeated, his voice now dangerously soft. It doesn't matter. She placed her hand over his. What matters is that you're here. After 100 days, you finally came. The guards shifted uncomfortably, clearly confused by this turn of events. One touched his earpiece, murmuring urgent instructions while watching the scene unfold. Alexander turned to Eloise, his gaze intensifying. You've been helping her. It wasn't a question, but Eloise nodded anyway, finding her voice. Yes, sir, for the past few months. Your name? Eloise Parker. I work for the Harringtons. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes at the mention of the name. He turned back to his mother, his voice gentler. Let's get you somewhere comfortable. We'll sort everything else out later. He helped her to her feet with careful movements, supporting her with a steadying arm. As they turned toward the waiting Tesla, the main gates began to open automatically. At the same moment, a Range Rover came speeding down the driveway from the mansion. It screeched to a halt and Margaret Harrington emerged, her face a mask of practiced charm. Mr. Morris, what a surprise. We weren't expecting you until... She stopped abruptly, her gaze falling on the disheveled woman beside him. Her expression shifted from confusion to dawning horror. Mrs. Morris? Alexander's mother lifted her chin, meeting Margaret Harrington's gaze with quiet dignity. Hello, Margaret. It's been a long time. Margaret paled visibly. I don't understand. You've been here all this time? Not all of it, Mrs. Morris replied evenly. Just the last 100 days watching, waiting, learning the truth about many things, including what kind of people live in this house. Mr. Harrington had emerged from the vehicle now, his face ashen as he approached. Eleanor, please. Whatever you think you know, save it, Robert. Alexander Morris's voice cut like steel. We'll discuss everything, but not here, not now. He guided his mother toward the Tesla, but she paused, turning back to Eloise. "Thank you," she said simply, "for your kindness when no one else offered any." Eloise nodded, still trying to process everything. "Of course, Mrs. Morris." As they reached the car, Alexander turned to his security team. "Secure the property as planned. I want a full sweep. Every room, every document, nothing leaves without my approval." The Harringtons stood frozen, watching as mother and son entered the vehicle. Before the door closed, Mrs. Morris, the woman Eloise had known as Eleanor, looked back one final time, her eyes meeting Eloise's with a gentle nod that somehow conveyed both apology and promise. The Tesla pulled away, the other identical vehicles falling into formation around it. Within moments, the procession had disappeared down the road, leaving behind a silence heavy with unanswered questions. Margaret Harrington turned to Eloise, fury replacing her shock. "What did you do? What did you tell her?" "Nothing, ma'am," Eloise replied truthfully. "I just gave her food and treated her like a human being." "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Mr. Harrington hissed, his face contorted with something between rage and fear. "That woman will be moving into the East Wing by this evening," announced a crisp voice. A woman in a tailored suit had approached silently, tablet in hand. "Mr. Morris has instructed that the Harrington family will relocate to the guest house effective immediately to make room for his team." "This is outrageous," Margaret sputtered. "This is our home." The woman regarded her coolly. "Mr. Morris now owns controlling interest in Harrington Industries and, by extension, this property. The paperwork was finalized this morning." She turned to Eloise. "Ms. Parker, Mr. Morris requests your presence at the Ritz-Carlton downtown at your earliest convenience. A car is waiting." Eloise blinked in surprise. I need to change first." "Of course. The driver will wait." As the woman walked away, Eloise felt the weight of the Harringtons' glares. Without a word, she turned and headed back toward her quarters, her mind racing with questions. In her room, she changed quickly into her best dress, a simple navy sheath she wore to church, and gathered her purse. As promised, a sleek black car waited at the service entrance, a driver holding the door open with practiced deference. The drive into the city passed in a blur of confusion and speculation. What did Alexander Morris want with her? What was the story behind his mother's strange vigil? And how were the Harringtons involved? The Ritz-Carlton gleamed with understated luxury as Eloise was escorted through the lobby to a private elevator. The operator used a key card to access the penthouse level, nodding respectfully as the doors opened directly into a sumptuous suite. Standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city was Mrs. Morris, Eleanor, now dressed in an elegant gray pantsuit that emphasized her slender frame. With her hair cleaned and styled, her face gently made up to cover the bruising, she looked every inch the wealthy matriarch rather than the homeless woman Eloise had known. "Eloise," she said warmly, turning from the view. "Thank you for coming." "Mrs. Morris," Eloise acknowledged, still struggling to reconcile this poised woman with the figure who had huddled by the gates for months. "Please call me Catherine. After sharing meals on a stone bench for so long, I think we're beyond formalities." She gestured to a seating area. "Join me?" Eloise sat carefully on the edge of a cream-colored sofa that probably cost more than her car. "I have questions." Catherine smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her face. "I imagine you do. Alexander will join us shortly to explain everything, but first I wanted to thank you privately." Her expression sobered. "In 3 months, you were the only person who showed me compassion without agenda or expectation. That means more than you know." "Why?" Eloise asked simply. "Why pretend to be homeless outside that specific house?" Catherine sighed, the weight of her experience evident in her eyes. "It's a long story involving betrayal, corporate espionage, and my son's former business partner, Robert Harrington." "Mr. Harrington worked with your son?" "He did more than that. He was like family to us after my husband died." Catherine's gaze drifted back to the window. "Until he orchestrated my disappearance 5 years ago to gain control of patents I held jointly with Alexander." The door opened before Eloise could respond, and Alexander Morris entered, followed by 2 assistants who discreetly retreated to another room after setting down several folders. "Ms. Parker," he greeted her, his handshake firm. Though his face remained serious, there was a warmth in his eyes that hadn't been present earlier. "I apologize for the dramatic events today. Subtlety wasn't an option once I confirmed my mother's location. Alexander has been searching for me for 5 years," Catherine explained. The Harringtons convinced the world I had voluntarily disappeared to a private island after a nervous breakdown. Meanwhile, they were keeping her sedated in a private facility until she managed to escape 3 months ago, Alexander continued, his controlled tone belying the fury beneath. She came to the gate to gather evidence while avoiding facial recognition systems that might alert Harrington, and to see if anyone in that household had a shred of humanity, Catherine added softly. You were the only one who passed that test, Eloise. Alexander sat across from them, his posture perfect despite the evident tension in his shoulders. My mother tells me you have a grandson, Marcus, is it? Eloise nodded, surprised. Yes, he's 8. She also mentioned you've been saving for his college education. Alexander opened one of the folders, removing a document. I'd like to establish a full scholarship fund in his name, covering any university he chooses plus living expenses. Eloise stared at him, speechless. Additionally, he continued, sliding the document across the table, I'm offering you a position as my mother's personal assistant at a considerable increase from your current salary. The job includes a company apartment in the city. I don't know what to say, Eloise managed finally. Catherine reached over to take her hand. Say yes, Eloise. I could use someone I trust during the weeks ahead. The press will be relentless once they learn I've returned. The position is yours regardless of what happens with the Harringtons, Alexander clarified. Though I should mention they likely won't be in that house much longer. Eloise thought of her 15 years working for a family who had viewed her as little more than furniture, who had ordered an elderly woman removed from their gate rather than offer help. Then she thought of her grandson, his future suddenly secure in ways she had never imagined possible. Yes, she said firmly. I accept. Catherine smiled, squeezing her hand. Excellent, we'll arrange for your belongings to be collected. There's one more thing, Alexander added, his expression somber once more. The bruises on my mother's face. She mentioned some local teenagers were responsible? Eloise hesitated, then nodded. That's what she told me. I wanted to call the police, but she refused. Would you recognize these individuals if you saw them again? Possibly. They sometimes visit the Harringtons' son. Something dark and determined settled over Alexander's features. Justice will be served, Ms. Parker, for everyone involved in harming my mother, physically, financially, or otherwise. The quiet conviction in his voice sent a shiver down Eloise's spine. She didn't doubt for a moment that Alexander Morris would fulfill that promise, methodically and completely. As if reading her thoughts, Catherine spoke gently. My son has waited a long time to right these wrongs, Eloise. The world is about to witness what happens when patience and power align with purpose. Outside the window, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, echoing the reckoning that was clearly coming. Eloise thought of the Harringtons, now facing the consequences of their actions after years of believing themselves untouchable. For the first time in 15 years, she felt something unexpected unfurling in her chest. Not just hope for her own future, but satisfaction at the knowledge that sometimes justice arrived in the most unexpected packages, and it had all begun with a simple act of kindness. A meal shared with a stranger who turned out to be anything but. The news broke like wildfire the following morning. Every major network and online publication blazed with the headline, Tech Billionaires Dead, Mother Found Alive. Catherine Morris's face, elegant and composed despite the fading bruise, appeared alongside archive photos of her from 5 years earlier. The contrast was striking but unmistakable. The brilliant mathematician and co-founder of Centauri Technologies had returned from the dead. Eloise watched the coverage from her new temporary office in the Ritz-Carlton suite, marveling at how quickly her life had changed. Less than 24 hours ago, she had been serving breakfast to the Harringtons. Now she was coordinating security protocols and fielding calls from journalists, desperate for exclusive interviews with Catherine Morris. They're like vultures, remarked Catherine, entering from the adjoining room. Despite the early hour, she was impeccably dressed in a tailored pantsuit, her silver-streaked hair swept into a chic updo. Have there been any calls from actual human beings? Eloise smiled, handing her a steaming cup of tea. Your son's assistant called. The board meeting is set for noon and the legal team has prepared all the documentation you requested. Catherine nodded, taking a sip of the tea. Perfect. And how are you settling in, Eloise? I imagine this is quite an adjustment. It's different, Eloise admitted, glancing down at her new designer clothing, a gift from Catherine that had been delivered at dawn, along with an entire wardrobe. The sleek charcoal trousers and ivory silk blouse felt foreign against her skin after years of polyester uniforms. I keep expecting someone to tell me to go prepare lunch. Old habits, Catherine said with understanding. I still wake up disoriented, expecting to see the underside of that hedge. A comfortable silence settled between them, the easy quiet of two women who had shared something profound, despite their vastly different circumstances. It was broken by the arrival of Alexander, who entered the suite with the focused energy that seemed to surround him permanently. "Good morning," he greeted them, kissing his mother's cheek, before nodding respectfully to Eloise. "The Harringtons have been served with formal notice. Their accounts have been frozen pending the fraud investigation." "How did they respond?" Catherine asked, her tone carefully neutral, though Eloise detected the slight tension in her shoulders. "Robert is threatening to sue. Margaret is having hysterics in the guest house." Alexander's expression remained impassive. "Their son has apparently fled to Europe. And the daughter? Amber?" Eloise found herself asking, thinking of the teenager who, despite her family's wealth and influence, had always seemed somehow lost. Alexander consulted his phone. "Still at the property. My security team reports she's refused to join her parents in the guest house." Eloise frowned. "She's only 17. This is precisely why I haven't had her removed," Alexander replied. "Despite everything, I'm not in the business of making teenagers homeless." Catherine set down her teacup. "Perhaps we should speak with her. She's innocent in all this." "I'll arrange it," Eloise offered, already reaching for her tablet. Another new acquisition that she was still learning to navigate. She might respond better to a familiar face. Alexander checked his watch. "The legal team is waiting downstairs. Mother, are you ready for this? It's going to be intense." Catherine straightened, a steely resolve settling over her features. "I've spent 5 years preparing for this day, Alexander. I'm more than ready." As they prepared to leave, Catherine turned to Eloise. "Would you do me a favor? Check on your grandson today. Make sure he knows your new situation won't change anything between you." The thoughtfulness of the request touched Eloise deeply. "Thank you, I will." After they departed for their meeting, Eloise took a moment to absorb the surreal turn her life had taken. Through the penthouse windows, she could see the sprawling city below, going about its business, unaware that her entire world had been transformed in less than a day. With practiced efficiency, she began organizing the chaos of incoming messages, separating urgent matters from those that could wait. Among the emails was a notification that her personal belongings had been retrieved from the Harrington estate and would be delivered to her new company apartment that afternoon. The message included a note that seemed almost smug in its tone. "The Harringtons did not interfere with the removal of your possessions." Eloise smiled slightly at that. "They wouldn't dare, not with Alexander Morris's security team overseeing every move." Around noon, she received a call from the front desk. "Ms. Parker, there's a young woman here asking for you. She says her name is Amber Harrington." Surprised, Eloise instructed them to send her up, then quickly cleared the coffee table of confidential documents. When Amber arrived, Eloise hardly recognized her. Gone was the polished appearance of wealth. Instead, the teenager wore jeans and a simple sweater, her face bare of makeup, and her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Ms. Parker," she began awkwardly, hovering near the door. I didn't know where else to go." "Come in, Amber." Eloise gestured to the sofa. "Would you like something to drink?" Amber shook her head, perching on the edge of the sofa. "Is it true? About Mrs. Morris being homeless at our gate? About my father being involved in her disappearance?" Eloise sat across from her, choosing her words carefully. "Yes, it's true. Mrs. Morris was gathering evidence while waiting for her son to find her. And you helped her. It wasn't a question. You brought her food, talked to her." "I did." Amber stared down at her hands. "I saw you sometimes from my window. I thought you were just, I don't know, being nice to some random old lady." She looked up, her eyes swimming with tears. "Everything's falling apart. The police were at our house this morning. My father's lawyer says he might go to prison." Despite everything the Harringtons had done, to her, to Catherine, to countless others with their callous disregard, Eloise couldn't help feeling a pang of sympathy for the girl before her. "I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this, Amber. My mother wants me to go stay with my aunt in Connecticut, but—" Amber hesitated. "I overheard things. About what they did. About the facility where they kept Mrs. Morris." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I can't be around them right now. I just can't." Eloise reached for her phone. "Let me make a call." 20 minutes later, Alexander Morris returned to the suite alone. He assessed Amber with a measured gaze that revealed nothing of his thoughts. "Ms. Harrington," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "Eloise tells me you're in a difficult position." Amber stood, her posture straight despite her obvious nervousness. "Mr. Morris, I want you to know I had no idea what my parents did. If I had known—" He held up a hand, stopping her. "You were 12 when my mother disappeared. No one is holding you responsible." "Still," Amber insisted, "I want to help. If there's anything I know that could be useful." Alexander studied her for a long moment. "Actually, there might be. Your father kept records. Documents, emails, possibly recordings. My team is searching the house, but knowing where to look would save valuable time." "His study," Amber replied immediately. "Behind the painting of the sailboat, there's a safe, and he has a laptop he never lets anyone touch. It's usually in the bottom drawer of his desk, locked with a key he keeps in his cologne bottle." Alexander raised an eyebrow, impressed. "You're very observant. When you grow up with parents like mine, you learn to pay attention," Amber said simply. Then, with a courage that surprised Eloise, she added, "Mr. Morris, I'd like to make a formal statement about things I've overheard, conversations between my parents and their lawyer about Mrs. Morris's condition. I was supposed to be asleep, but that would be extremely helpful," Alexander acknowledged, his expression softening slightly. "As for your current situation, I've arranged temporary accommodations for you at the hotel's executive apartment on the floor below. You'll have privacy and security while this plays out." Amber's eyes widened. "Why would you help me? After what my family did?" "Because you're not your parents," Alexander stated matter-of-factly. "And my mother believes in judging people by their own actions, not their associations." He gestured toward Eloise, a philosophy that has served her well, as it happens. Later that evening, after Amber had been settled into her temporary apartment and Alexander had returned to the ongoing legal proceedings, Eloise received a video call from her daughter. "Mom!" Jessica exclaimed, her face filling the screen. "Marcus and I saw you on the news. You're working for Catherine Morris now." "The Catherine Morris?" Eloise laughed, still adjusting to the idea herself. "It's been a whirlwind day." "But how? Why? The news is saying she was pretending to be homeless or something, and the Harringtons are under investigation." "It's complicated, sweetheart," Eloise replied, unsure how much she should share about the ongoing situation. "Let's just say I was in the right place at the right time doing the right thing." Jessica shook her head in amazement. "Only you, Mom. Only you would somehow befriend a billionaire's missing mother and end up with a fancy new job." "Grandma!" Marcus's face suddenly appeared, pushing his mother aside. "Are you in a castle?" "It looks like a castle." "Not quite, buddy, just a nice hotel room for now." Eloise felt a rush of love for her grandson. "I'll be moving into a new apartment soon, though, with a bedroom just for you for your weekend visits." "Will I still see you this weekend?" His expression turned worried. "Mom said you might be too busy now." "Never too busy for you," Eloise assured him firmly. "In fact, I was thinking we might do something special. There's an amazing science museum downtown that we could visit. Would you like that?" Marcus's face lit up. "Yes? Can we go to the planetarium too? The one with the stars?" "Absolutely." After finishing the call with promises to visit soon, Eloise found herself drawn to the window, watching as the city lights began to glimmer in the gathering dusk. So much had changed so quickly. Her mind drifted to the Harringtons, wondering how they were coping with their sudden fall from grace. The suite door opened, and Catherine entered, looking weary but satisfied. She joined Eloise at the window, following her gaze to the city below. "The board voted unanimously to reinstate me as chief research officer," she said quietly. "Robert's shares have been seized pending the fraud investigation." "Congratulations," Eloise offered, though the word seemed insufficient for such a monumental victory. Catherine turned to her, her expression thoughtful. "You know, when I first escaped from that facility, I was devastated, confused, angry. I wanted nothing more than to expose Robert immediately, to scream the truth to anyone who would listen." "What changed your mind?" "I realized that after 5 years of sedation and isolation, no one would believe me. I needed evidence, strategy." A hint of steel entered her voice. "I needed to understand exactly how deep the betrayal went and who was involved." "So you positioned yourself at their gate," Eloise concluded, "watching, waiting."
"Yes, and in doing so, I learned something unexpected." Catherine's gaze returned to the city lights. "I learned that wealth and privilege don't guarantee character, that titles and positions don't reflect a person's true worth." She turned to face Eloise fully. "I watched servants with more integrity than their employers."
"I saw gardeners treat plants with more care than the Harringtons treated people. And I saw you, someone with every reason to ignore an old vagrant." Show consistent kindness without expectation of reward. It was the right thing to do, Eloise said simply. Yes, and how rarely that matters to most people. Catherine smiled sadly. In those 100 days, I relearned what truly matters, what builds a life worth living. The two women stood in companionable silence, watching as the last traces of sunlight faded from the horizon. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, press conferences, legal proceedings, the continued unraveling of the Harringtons' deception. But tonight, in this quiet moment, there was only the shared understanding of two women who had discovered each other's true character in the most unlikely of circumstances. The following week unfolded with the precision of a well-orchestrated symphony, each day bringing new developments in what the media had dubbed the Morris Resurrection. Catherine's first public appearance, a press conference held in Centauri Technologies' gleaming headquarters, had drawn international attention, with journalists from as far as Tokyo and Berlin clamoring for details of her 5-year absence and miraculous return. Eloise watched from the wings as Catherine addressed the world with grace and measured candor, neither sensationalizing her ordeal nor minimizing the severity of what had been done to her. Alexander stood protectively at her side, his expression revealing nothing while his mother spoke of corporate betrayal at the highest level and systematic attempts to erase not just my research, but my very existence. What Catherine didn't mention, at least not publicly, was the steady stream of evidence being uncovered at the Harrington estate. Eloise had been present when Alexander's security team discovered the hidden safe behind the sailboat painting, exactly where Amber had indicated it would be. Inside were documents detailing the elaborate scheme, forged consent forms for Catherine's treatment, offshore accounts where embezzled research funds had been diverted, and, most damning of all, a recorded conversation between Robert Harrington and the director of the private facility where Catherine had been held. Make sure she remains compliant, Robert's voice had instructed coldly. If her lucidity returns, increase the dosage. No visitors, no calls, no exceptions. The Harringtons' fall was as swift as it was complete. Robert was arrested on multiple charges including kidnapping, fraud, and corporate espionage. Margaret, though not directly implicated in Catherine's confinement, faced her own charges related to financial crimes. Their assets were frozen, their social standing evaporated overnight, and the mansion, once a symbol of their untouchable status, was now being systematically dismantled by investigators seeking additional evidence. Through it all, Amber Harrington had shown remarkable resilience. The teenager had provided a formal statement to investigators, detailing conversations she'd overheard throughout her adolescence. Snippets that, when pieced together, created a damning picture of her parents' involvement. Now, with her parents' permission, granted only after their lawyers advised it would look better for their case, Amber had been enrolled in a prestigious boarding school in Vermont, far from the media circus surrounding her family's disgrace. On the morning of Eloise's 7th day in her new role, she arrived at the office suite Catherine had established in the Centauri Technologies building to find an unexpected visitor waiting. Marcus. Surprise, her grandson exclaimed, launching himself into her arms. Behind him, Jessica stood smiling, dressed in her nurse's scrubs. What are you doing here? Eloise asked, hugging Marcus tightly. Mom said I could come see where you work now. Marcus pulled back, his eyes wide as he took in the elegant surroundings. This is way cooler than that old house. Jessica approached, giving her mother a quick hug. Sorry for the ambush. His school canceled classes today for teacher training and I couldn't find a sitter before my shift. I thought maybe. You thought exactly right, came Catherine's voice as she emerged from her private office. You must be Jessica, and this young man must be Marcus. Marcus stared up at Catherine with undisguised curiosity. Are you the lady who pretended to be homeless? The one Grandma helped? Marcus, Jessica admonished, mortified, but Catherine laughed, a genuine warm sound that seemed to brighten the room. Yes, that's me, though it wasn't exactly pretending, more like undercover work. Like a spy? Marcus asked, clearly impressed. Something like that, Catherine agreed, her eyes twinkling. Would you like to see something cool? We have a holographic display of our newest quantum computing project in the demonstration room. Marcus looked to his mother and grandmother for permission, practically vibrating with excitement when they both nodded. As Catherine led the boy toward the demonstration room, she glanced back at Eloise with a smile that conveyed both understanding and invitation. I think my schedule just cleared up for the morning, Eloise said to Jessica, linking arms with her daughter. Let's go see some holograms. The morning passed in a blur of technological wonders as Catherine personally guided them through Centauri's innovations. Marcus absorbed everything with the unfiltered enthusiasm of an 8-year-old, asking questions that made even the senior engineers smile. By lunchtime, when Jessica had to leave for her shift, Marcus was thoroughly enchanted by the world of quantum computing. "Can he stay with you for the rest of the day?" Jessica asked Eloise quietly. "I know it's asking a lot with your new job." "It's no trouble at all," Catherine interjected, having overheard. "In fact, I could use a fresh perspective on some of our educational programming. Marcus seems to have quite the scientific mind. And so, in perhaps the most unusual take-your-grandson-to-work day ever recorded, Marcus spent the afternoon in the company of one of the world's leading mathematicians, offering his unfiltered opinions on how to make quantum computing less boring for kids his age." As Eloise observed Catherine's gentle patience with Marcus's questions, she was struck by the contrast between this brilliant, compassionate woman and the frail figure who had huddled by the Harringtons' gate for months. Both were authentic aspects of the same remarkable person, a person who had endured unimaginable betrayal without losing her fundamental kindness. "He's a special boy," Catherine commented later, as they watched Marcus exploring an interactive display under the supervision of a young engineer. "You've raised him well, you and your daughter. We've done our best," Eloise acknowledged, pride warming her voice. "Though college seemed like a distant dream until recently." Catherine's expression grew serious. "Alexander has finalized the scholarship arrangements. Marcus's education is secure through doctoral level, should he choose to go that far. The paperwork will be delivered to your apartment tomorrow." Eloise felt emotion tighten her throat. "I don't know how to thank you." "You already have," Catherine replied simply. 100 times over, with each meal you brought to a stranger when no one was watching." She paused, her gaze distant. "You know, during those months at the gate, I observed so many people. The wealthy neighbors in their luxury cars, the service personnel, the delivery people. Most never even made eye contact with me. People see what they expect to see," Eloise observed. "Or only what they want to see." "Precisely. And what does that say about a society where the easiest thing to ignore is human suffering?" Catherine's voice remained measured, but Eloise detected the passion beneath her words. "That's why I've decided to launch a new initiative through the Morris Foundation." "What kind of initiative?" "A comprehensive program addressing homelessness, not just through shelters and food banks, though those are essential, but through systemic change. Education, healthcare, affordable housing, legal advocacy." Catherine straightened, her eyes bright with purpose. "And I want you to help me run it." Eloise blinked in surprise. "Me? But I don't have any experience with seeing people who others ignore? With understanding what dignity means to someone who has lost everything else? With recognizing humanity, regardless of circumstance?" Catherine smiled gently. "I disagree, Eloise. You have exactly the experience this initiative needs." Before Eloise could respond, Alexander entered the room. His customary intensity softened somewhat by the presence of Marcus, who immediately bombarded him with questions about the electric sports car he'd seen in the company garage. With remarkable patience, Alexander answered each question, even crouching to Marcus's level to explain how the car's autonomous driving system functioned. Watching this powerful man, whose name inspired both fear and respect in boardrooms worldwide, engage so genuinely with an 8-year-old boy, Eloise felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. Like his mother, Alexander Morris was more complex than his public persona suggested. That evening, after dropping Marcus off at home with promises of future visits to the cool computer place, Eloise returned to her new apartment, a spacious 2-bedroom residence in a secure building owned by Centauri Technologies. As she settled onto her balcony with a cup of tea, her phone buzzed with an incoming message. It was a news alert. Breaking. Robert Harrington pleads guilty in Morris kidnapping case. Eloise clicked through to the article, scanning its contents with mixed emotions. Robert had accepted a plea deal, admitting to his role in Catherine's abduction and false imprisonment in exchange for reduced charges. Margaret, maintaining her ignorance of the full extent of her husband's crimes, would face separate financial charges. A knock at her door interrupted her reading. Opening it revealed Catherine, holding a bottle of champagne, and wearing a smile that was equal parts triumph and melancholy. "I thought you might have seen the news," she said, stepping inside at Eloise's invitation. "Just now," Eloise confirmed, fetching glasses from her kitchen. "How do you feel about it?" Catherine considered the question as she poured the champagne. "Vindicated, certainly. Relieved that the legal proceedings won't drag on for years, she handed a glass to Eloise. But also, sad, Robert was like a brother to my late husband. He was Alexander's godfather. We trusted him completely. That makes his betrayal all the worse, Eloise observed. Yes, Catherine raised her glass. To justice, however bittersweet. They clinked glasses, the crystal producing a clear, resonant tone that seemed to hang in the air between them. What happens now? Eloise asked after a moment. Catherine's expression shifted, determination replacing reflection. Now we build something meaningful from all this. The Foundation initiative I mentioned, for starters. And there's the new quantum encryption project the government has been waiting for. She moved to the balcony door, gazing out at the city lights. But first, I think I need to revisit those gates one last time, for closure. Eloise understood immediately. Would you like company? Catherine turned, gratitude evident in her eyes. I was hoping you'd offer. The Harrington estate looked different in the pale morning light. Smaller somehow. Less imposing despite its sprawling grounds and colonial facade. Yellow police tape cordoned off sections of the driveway where forensic teams continued their meticulous investigation, and security personnel in Centauri Technologies windbreakers patrolled the perimeter with quiet efficiency. Eloise and Catherine sat in the back of a sleek town car, observing the scene through tinted windows. Neither had spoken much during the drive from the city, each lost in her own thoughts about the significance of this return. For Eloise, the mansion represented 15 years of servitude, of being invisible in plain sight. For Catherine, it symbolized both captivity and liberation, the pivot point around which her life had violently turned. It's smaller than I remembered, Catherine murmured, echoing Eloise's thoughts. Fear has a way of magnifying things, Eloise replied softly. The driver pulled up to the main gate, the very spot where they had first met 3 months earlier. At Catherine's request, he remained in the car while the two women stepped out into the crisp autumn air. A security officer approached, recognized them immediately, and withdrew to a respectful distance. Catherine walked slowly to the stone bench where she had spent countless hours waiting and watching. Her fingers trailed along its rough surface, lingering on the spot where Eloise had placed containers of food day after day. It's strange, she said, how a place can hold such different meanings. To the Harringtons, this was merely the entrance to their domain. To me, it was both prison and pulpit, the stage from which I observed humanity at its most authentic. Eloise nodded, understanding. Places hold the energy we bring to them. Indeed. Catherine sat down, patting the space beside her. When Eloise joined her, she continued, I learned more about human nature in these 3 months than in my previous 65 years. I watched gardeners sneak flowers to their girlfriends while their employers weren't looking. I saw delivery people leave extra packages by mistake at houses where they knew children lived. And I witnessed a housekeeper share her modest lunch with a stranger, day after day, without expecting anything in return. I just did what anyone would do. Eloise demurred. Catherine's laugh held no mockery, only gentle correction. If these months taught me anything, it's that what you did is precisely what most people wouldn't do. The comfortable lie we tell ourselves, that anyone would help, allows us to feel better about the help we ourselves withhold. They sat in companionable silence watching as investigators emerged from the mansion carrying boxes of evidence. In the distance, a moving truck approached, likely containing the remainder of the Harringtons' personal belongings being relocated to whatever reduced circumstances awaited them now. Have you heard from Amber? Eloise asked, thinking of the teenager who had shown such unexpected courage. Alexander spoke with her yesterday. She's settling in well at the boarding school. Apparently, she's considering a future in computer science. Catherine smiled slightly. He's arranged for one of our engineers to mentor her remotely. Eloise raised an eyebrow. That's generous, considering everything her family did. Children shouldn't pay for their parents' sins, Catherine said simply. Besides, Amber proved her character when it mattered most. That deserves recognition. The moving truck passed through the gates, its engine rumbling in the quiet morning. As it disappeared down the driveway, Catherine stood, her posture straight and resolute. I've seen enough, she declared. The past has had its due. Now it's time to focus on the future. As they returned to the car, Eloise noticed a familiar figure among the security personnel, Vanessa, the assistant housekeeper whose disdain had been so palpable just days earlier. The young woman stood awkwardly near the security checkpoint, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and resignation, as she watched their approach. Catherine noticed Eloise's gaze and followed it to Vanessa. Someone you know? Former colleague, Eloise explained briefly. Not particularly friendly. To Eloise's surprise, Catherine changed direction, walking directly toward Vanessa with measured steps. The young woman visibly tensed, her eyes darting as if seeking escape. "Good morning," Catherine greeted her pleasantly. "You worked in the household, I believe?" Vanessa nodded stiffly. "Yes, ma'am, assistant housekeeper. And now?" "Unemployed, ma'am." Vanessa swallowed hard. "I came to collect my final paycheck, but with everything happening." She gestured vaguely at the police presence. Catherine studied her thoughtfully. "You were aware of my presence at the gate?" "Yes, ma'am." Vanessa's cheeks flushed with shame. I may have said some unkind things about you to Ms. Parker." "More than some," Eloise muttered under her breath. Catherine's expression remained neutral. "And what have you learned from this experience, young lady?" The question hung in the air, direct and uncompromising. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably before answering with unexpected candor. "That I judged without knowing. That I valued the wrong things." Her voice grew quieter. "That I picked the wrong role models." Something softened in Catherine's demeanor. "Those are valuable lessons, if genuinely absorbed." She reached into her purse, extracting a business card. "The Morris Foundation is expanding its community outreach programs. We'll need administrative support staff. The pay is fair, the hours reasonable, and the work meaningful." Vanessa stared at the card in disbelief. "You're offering me a job? After how I behaved? I'm offering you an opportunity to demonstrate that your revelations are sincere." Catherine's tone was firm but not unkind. "Whether you seize it is entirely up to you." As they returned to the car, leaving a stunned Vanessa clutching the business card, Eloise couldn't contain her surprise. "After everything she said? The way she treated you?" Catherine settled into the leather seat with a small smile. "Transformation rarely happens without opportunity, Eloise. Besides," her eyes twinkled with unexpected mischief, "can you imagine a more appropriate consequence than having her work for a foundation helping the homeless people she once disparaged?" The car pulled away from the Harrington estate, leaving behind the gates that had been the unlikely meeting place of two women from vastly different worlds. Neither looked back as the mansion receded in the distance, diminishing with each passing moment until it disappeared from view entirely. 2 days later, Eloise stood in the wings of a convention center ballroom watching as Catherine addressed the assembled crowd at the official launch of the Morris Foundation's new initiative, Dignity First. The program would combine immediate assistance for homeless individuals with long-term systemic reforms, addressing not just the symptoms of homelessness, but its complex underlying causes. "We cannot solve what we refuse to see," Catherine was saying, her voice steady and passionate. "And what I learned during my time on the streets was that invisibility is perhaps the cruelest aspect of homelessness. To be human is to crave recognition, yet our society has perfected the art of looking away." The audience, a mix of business leaders, nonprofit directors, government officials, and media representatives, hung on her every word. Catherine Morris's story had captured international attention, transforming her from respected mathematician to cultural icon overnight. Now she was leveraging that attention with surgical precision, directing it toward issues that had gone too long unaddressed. The Dignity First initiative begins with a simple premise, that every human being deserves to be seen, heard, and treated with respect, regardless of their circumstances. Catherine's gaze swept across the room. "This isn't charity, it's justice. It isn't giving, it's restoring what should never have been taken." From his position at a side table, Alexander watched his mother with unmistakable pride. Beside him sat Marcus, specially invited for the occasion and looking somewhat overwhelmed in his new suit. When Catherine mentioned the educational component of the initiative, which would include scholarships for homeless youth, the boy's eyes widened with understanding of his own indirect connection to the cause. "Finally," Catherine continued, "I would like to introduce the woman who will serve as executive director of Dignity First, someone whose compassion and discernment make her uniquely qualified for this role." She extended her hand toward the wings. "Eloise Parker, would you please join me?" Though they had rehearsed this moment, Eloise still felt a flutter of nerves as she stepped onto the stage. The spotlight seemed impossibly bright, the audience impossibly vast. Yet as she took her place beside Catherine, she found her voice with surprising clarity. "Thank you, Dr. Morris." She addressed the crowd with the same quiet dignity she had always possessed, though few had bothered to notice it before. "Many of you are wondering about my qualifications for this position. I don't have advanced degrees or nonprofit experience. What I do have is 15 years of observing how wealth and power can blind people to the humanity around them, and how simple acts of recognition can restore dignity to those who have been denied it. As Eloise outlined the specific programs Dignity First would implement, from immediate housing solutions to mental health services, from legal advocacy to job training, she felt a profound sense of rightness. This was why Catherine's path and hers had crossed, not just for individual redemption or justice, but for something larger, something that might create ripples of change beyond anything either of them could accomplish alone. After the presentation, as attendees mingled during the reception, Eloise found herself approached by an elderly couple she didn't recognize. "Ms. Parker," the woman began, her eyes bright with emotion. "We wanted to thank you personally." Confused, Eloise smiled politely. "I'm afraid we haven't met." "No, but our son has told us all about you." The man extended his hand. "We're Catherine's in-laws, Alexander's grandparents. We thought Catherine was lost to us forever. What you did was very little, really," Eloise demurred. "On the contrary," the woman insisted, clasping Eloise's hand between both of hers. "It was everything. You saw our Catherine when no one else would look. You treated her with dignity when others saw only what they expected to see." Before Eloise could respond, Marcus appeared at her side, tugging gently at her sleeve. "Grandma, Dr. Morris says they have a whole room of fancy desserts for after the boring talking part. Can we go see?" The elderly couple laughed, tension breaking. "And who is this young man?" the woman asked warmly. "My grandson, Marcus," Eloise replied, resting her hand on the boy's shoulder. "Marcus, these are Dr. Morris's family." "Cool. Did you know your daughter-in-law was a spy?" Marcus asked with characteristic directness. "She told me all about how she collected evidence and stuff. That's better than just being a regular scientist." "Marcus," Eloise began apologetically, but Catherine's father-in-law was already chuckling. "You're absolutely right, young man," he agreed, crouching slightly to meet Marcus at eye level. "And did you know that your grandmother is a hero? The very best kind. The kind that helps people even when no one is watching." Marcus nodded matter-of-factly. "Yeah, I know. Mom says Grandma always does the right thing, even when it's hard. That's why she got the cool new job." From across the room, Eloise caught Catherine's eye. The two women exchanged a smile of perfect understanding, acknowledgement of how far they had both come from that stone bench by the gate, and how much further they would go together. Later that evening, after Marcus had been returned to Jessica, and the last of the event's attendees had departed, Catherine and Eloise sat in the now empty ballroom, shoes off and glasses of champagne in hand. "To new beginnings," Catherine proposed, raising her glass. "And unexpected friendships," Eloise added. As their glasses clinked, Eloise reflected on the strange alchemy that had transformed an act of simple kindness into something so profound. She thought of the Harringtons, once so powerful, now facing the consequences of their actions. She thought of Amber, finding her own path separate from her parents' misdeeds. She thought of Vanessa, who had appeared at the foundation offices that morning, resume in hand and determination in her eyes. And she thought of Eleanor, the dignified, resilient woman who had sat patiently by those gates day after day, revealing herself only to those who cared enough to truly see her. "What are you thinking?" Catherine asked, noticing Eloise's contemplative expression. "About visibility," Eloise answered truthfully. "About how sometimes we have to lose everything to be truly seen." Catherine nodded slowly. "And sometimes being truly seen is how we find what we never knew we were missing." Outside the convention center windows, the city glittered with countless lights, each one representing lives intersecting in ways both mundane and extraordinary. Somewhere among those lights were people waiting to be seen, acknowledged, restored to the dignity that was their birthright. Tomorrow, Eloise would begin the work of finding them, one human connection at a time. 6 months later, spring unfurled across the city in vibrant bursts of renewal. Cherry blossoms dotted the parks with ethereal pink clouds, while newly green leaves rustled in the gentle April breeze. From the windows of the Dignity First headquarters, a converted warehouse in a once neglected neighborhood, Eloise could see transformation everywhere she looked. The building itself embodied the initiative's philosophy. What others had abandoned, they had recognized as valuable. The industrial space now housed not only administrative offices but also a community center, transitional housing units, a medical clinic, and educational facilities. Where machinery had once manufactured products, people now rebuilt lives. "The quarterly report is ready for your review," announced Vanessa, placing a tablet on Eloise's desk. The young woman had surprised everyone with her dedication over the past months, working her way from entry-level administrative assistant to Eloise's capable deputy. And the Times reporter is confirmed for 2 o'clock. Thank you. Eloise glanced up from the grant proposal she'd been reviewing. How are the preparations for the anniversary gala coming along? On schedule. We've confirmed attendance from 3 senators, the mayor, and over 200 corporate sponsors. Vanessa hesitated before adding with quiet pride, and 15 of our program graduates will be speaking. Eloise smiled at that last detail. Those 15 individuals represented the initiative's first success stories, people who had arrived homeless and hopeless, and were now employed, housed, and thriving. Their testimonials would be far more powerful than any political speech or celebrity endorsement. As Vanessa departed, Eloise's phone chimed with an incoming video call from Catherine. She accepted it immediately, her screen filling with Catherine's face against the backdrop of what appeared to be an airport lounge. "Good morning from Geneva," Catherine greeted her. "How are things on your end?" "Busy but productive," Eloise replied. "The community health program launched yesterday, and we're already at capacity for dental appointments. How's the conference?" "Encouraging. The European coalition seems genuinely committed to implementing similar programs across their major cities." Catherine's expression turned thoughtful. "It's strange to think that none of this would exist if Robert hadn't betrayed us, if I hadn't spent those months by the gate. Life's strangest gift is perspective," Eloise observed. It was a conversation they'd revisited periodically, this paradox of good emerging from terrible circumstances. "Indeed," Catherine's smile returned. "Speaking of gifts, Alexander tells me Marcus is enjoying his new robotics club." Eloise laughed. "Enjoying is an understatement. Our apartment has been invaded by half-built robots. Jessica says he talks about nothing else. The foundations of a promising career," Catherine noted with approval. Alexander was the same at that age, always dismantling household appliances to understand their mechanics. Their conversation shifted to operational matters, funding allocations, upcoming legislative initiatives, strategic partnerships. In the 6 months since Dignity First had launched, the program had expanded to 3 additional cities, with plans for another 5 by year's end. What had begun as a local response to homelessness was evolving into a national movement, with Catherine as its visionary and Eloise as its practical architect. After concluding the call with promises to reconnect after Catherine's return, Eloise checked her schedule for the afternoon. Between the media interview and a meeting with potential investors, she had just enough time to make her weekly visit to the community center's gathering space, a ritual she maintained regardless of how crowded her calendar became. The community room buzzed with activity when she arrived. Art therapy was in session at one table, while a job skills workshop occupied another. Near the windows, a volunteer was conducting mock interviews with 3 participants preparing for upcoming job opportunities. The atmosphere was one of purposeful hope, so different from the desperation that typically characterized spaces serving the homeless. "Ms. Parker," called a familiar voice. Eloise turned to find Teresa, a 58-year-old former teacher who had lost everything following a catastrophic illness and inadequate insurance. She had been among the first to enter the Dignity First program, and now served as a peer mentor for newcomers. "I was hoping to catch you today," Teresa continued, guiding Eloise to a quiet corner. "I wanted you to meet someone." Seated at a small table was an elderly man with weathered features and clear, intelligent eyes. He stood as they approached, his posture suggesting military background despite his current circumstances. "This is Colonel James Whitaker," Teresa explained. "He's been living in his car for the past 8 months since his VA benefits were delayed. Colonel, this is Eloise Parker, our executive director." "Ma'am," the man acknowledged with a respectful nod. "Ms. Torres has been telling me about your program. It sounds almost too good to be true." "Almost, but not quite," Eloise replied with a smile, taking a seat across from him. "Why don't you tell me your story, Colonel?" As James Whitaker recounted his journey from decorated service to homelessness, a journey marked by PTSD, administrative failures, and the gradual erosion of his support network, Eloise listened with the full attention that had become the hallmark of Dignity First's approach. She asked thoughtful questions, took notes on immediate needs, and explained available resources without a hint of condescension or pity. "We can have you in temporary housing by this evening," she concluded. "From there, we'll work on permanent solutions, including expediting your benefits and connecting you with specialized support for veterans." The colonel studied her with cautious hope. Why go to all this trouble for strangers? Because you're not a stranger, Colonel. You're a person whose path has intersected with ours. Eloise held his gaze steadily. And because dignity isn't something to be earned, it's something to be recognized and preserved. Later, as the afternoon sun slanted through her office windows, Eloise prepared for her interview with the Times journalist. These media opportunities were critical for raising awareness, but she still found them somewhat uncomfortable. This new visibility after decades of being largely unseen. Ms. Parker? Vanessa appeared at the door. The reporter is here, and there's been a development you should know about. Something in her tone caused Eloise to look up sharply. What kind of development? Robert Harrington was released this morning. Early parole for cooperation with ongoing investigations. Vanessa hesitated. The reporter knows. Eloise absorbed this information with carefully controlled features. Robert Harrington had been sentenced to 5 years, but was now free after just 6 months. Another example of how justice operated differently, depending on one's resources and connections. Thank you for the heads up, she said evenly. Please show the reporter in. The interview began with standard questions about Dignity First's methodology and outcomes. The journalist, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, was thorough in her research, asking nuanced questions about recidivism rates and long-term sustainability. Then, predictably, she steered toward the personal. Your journey to this position is rather unconventional, she noted. From household staff to executive director of a multi-million-dollar initiative, some might question whether your background adequately prepared you for this role. Eloise smiled slightly. My background is precisely what prepared me. I spent 15 years observing how wealth insulates people from understanding the realities faced by others. I learned that competence and character exist independently of titles or bank accounts. Most importantly, I discovered that meaningful change rarely comes from the top down. It emerges when we recognize humanity where others see only circumstance. The journalist nodded, making notes before continuing. And your relationship with Catherine Morris? It began under extraordinary circumstances. Life rarely follows conventional paths, Eloise replied. Sometimes the most significant connections form when we're at our most vulnerable, or when we extend ourselves to someone who is. Speaking of vulnerability, the journalist continued, I understand Robert Harrington was released today, given his role in Mrs. Morris's ordeal and your own history with the family. How do you feel about that? It was the question Eloise had been expecting, yet it still required a moment's reflection. Justice takes many forms, she finally answered. Mr. Harrington's legal consequences are between him and the court system. Our focus remains on the work ahead, creating systems where people aren't discarded when they become inconvenient or devalued when they lack resources. After the interview concluded, Eloise found herself drawn once more to the window, watching as program participants moved purposefully between buildings, attending classes, keeping appointments, rebuilding momentum in lives that had temporarily stalled. The knowledge of Robert Harrington's release stirred complex emotions, but they were overshadowed by the tangible evidence of what had been built from the ashes of that experience. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Catherine. Just landed. Good news from Europe. Dinner tonight to celebrate? Bringing Alexander and a surprise guest. As Eloise typed her affirmative response, another message appeared. This one from Jessica with a photo attached. The image showed Marcus proudly displaying a small robot he'd constructed, his face alight with achievement. The caption read, First place in the school science fair says he's going to be just like Mr. Morris's when he grows up. Eloise smiled, saving the image before returning to her work. The afternoon stretched before her with meetings and decisions, challenges and opportunities. In the evening, there would be celebration with the unlikely family that had formed around shared values rather than shared blood. And tomorrow would bring new stories, new connections, the continuing ripple effects of a simple decision, made months ago, to see the humanity in a stranger by a gate. Outside, spring continued its relentless renewal, coaxing life from dormant soil and color from winter bare branches. Inside, in offices and classrooms and temporary homes, human beings did the same, growing toward possibility with newfound dignity, their paths forever altered by the profound truth that to be truly seen is perhaps the greatest gift one person can offer another. And it all began with a plate of food, offered without expectation of return, proof that even the smallest gestures of recognition can ultimately transform worlds. Support our channel, like the video, subscribe, and share this story to inspire others.